Welcome to the Big Movement Podcast. If you're ready to create results and make huge strides in your business, finances, personal development, and health, then you're in the right place. Pushing past excuses and powering through procrastination can be a challenge alone. Here, you'll get the support, tools, and knowledge you need to get to the level you desire in your business and life. Let's get started with your host, Byron Ingram.
And welcome to another episode of the Big Movement Podcast. Today, we have the Doc Compton, who is recognized as one of the nation's foremost authorities on consumer credit, and with over 2 decades of experience in consumer credit and credit repair, Doc has helped thousands regain control of their financial futures. So we're going to learn a little bit more how you fix your stuff so that way you can be able to buy the homes, the cars, and all the stuff that you need credit for. So let's give a welcome to Doc. So Doc,
hey,
welcome.
What's going on, Byron? Thanks so much for having me, brother.
Oh, sure, definitely. It's all about making big things happen. So how in the world did you get into credit repair? It's not like there's that, you think back to high school, you have that career day, you look at choices, there's all the things, and there's like credit repair.
Well, you know what?
How did you get
into most of the people that are actually in my industry, I actually needed credit repair. I went to college with very little in the way of financial training or education and got there, and there was about $2,000 in available credit in my mailbox at Austin College up in Sherman. And we all pretty much already know how that story ends. But basically, I ran those cards up, got them charged off, and within a couple of years couldn't get an apartment, couldn't buy a car, couldn't do much of anything that required my credit. And back then, it wasn't at all like it is today, where you have a credit repair company on every corner and a million different online outlets for consumer credit repair. It was mostly attorneys doing it. And the attorneys that did it charged an arm and a leg. And obviously, fresh out of college and so on, I didn't have the money to pay for it. So I really just kind of started studying the laws that cover consumer credit and credit reporting and so on, many of which the ones that we use today didn't even exist back when I first started looking into the subject. So I've just kind of remained a student for the last 23 or so years of all things consumer credit related, particularly credit reporting and credit repair and restoration. And, fast forward to here we are now.
It's quite the journey. So outside of just getting like a car or an apartment or a house, what are the things that credit really affects people? And because some people just don't think, I don't need it. I don't care. I have a car. I'm in a place. But they don't realize the extent of how it can impact their
Absolutely.
life.
There's, a million guys and ladies on TV, these, financial experts and gurus, and they lead the mass populace to believe that credit is a bad thing. And the reality of it is, you show me a millionaire, let alone a billionaire, and I'll show you somebody who has learned to effectively use credit as a tool. And that's really what it comes down to. As it stands, I often say that the system is very rigged against the average consumer. And that's simply a product of the fact that they don't know how it works or how it's designed to work. Keeping in mind that the credit reporting system is not designed really to benefit the consumer. It's designed to benefit the banks who would potentially make lending decisions based on your repayment history and your credit score, which is really little more than a statistical analysis of the likelihood that you'll pay back money that you've borrowed. So, yeah, now in terms of the different ways that it can impact you, there's a million. Obviously, like you said, the cars, the homes, things like that. But a lot of times people forget, if you squeak by and get into a home, well, you're going to have to turn on the utilities. The water, the gas, the electricity, cable, telephone, if you get a landline, all of those things can depend on your credit score. You can either just go in, get it with no deposit and so on if you have a good score, or you may be asked to put down significant deposits if you have a bad credit score or subpar credit score. So that's right away, you're moving into the home, and if you're like most people, you've spent a lot of money to get into the home. Well, now you've got to spend a bunch of money on top of that to be able to get all your utilities turned on. So in and of itself, that can be a huge nightmare. Then you have the things like insurance. it has been proven that there is a direct link between your credit score and your risk as an insurable party, particularly for auto insurance. If you have a bad credit score, it has been proven over and over and over again that you are more likely to have an accident. If you live in an area that perhaps is not as financially set as a much nicer area, well, then the likelihood of you having a lower credit score and thus all of the problems that come with it are higher, which means that your insurance is going to cost more. Your health insurance, life insurance. If you're going to go and get $1 million life insurance policy, one of the things they check is to see that you don't have terrible credit and that you're not going to go out and accidentally, and I'm holding up my quote fingers here, accidentally drive off of a bridge or into a building to cash in that $1 million life insurance policy and give it to your spouse and children and so on and so forth. So there's just a couple of ways. Another big one, and this is one that people don't think about a lot, but employment. Now, it's important to note that employers cannot see your credit score. They can see your credit report, and there's limitations on what they can see in your credit report. It's more detailed than I'll bore people with, but for the most part, they can see your report, but not your scores. I'll never forget, I saw Hillary Clinton in one of the rallies before the election talking about how consumers' credit scores were keeping them from being able to get a job, and I was like, oh my goodness. A presidential candidate did not just say that. It's not true. So, but it can impact your ability to get a job or to get a promotion or a higher security clearance for people that work in sensitive industries or governmental stuff. So.
Oh, yes. I could definitely relate to that in the past when I was in the Air Force, because if you had those issues there, then depending on what you're doing, you could be considered a risk, because they'll look at it as, if you're having financial trouble, you're more likely that you could be approached by a foreign government. Yeah. And if we give you a little bit of money, you could give us a little bit of something in return.
Yeah, absolutely. You definitely put a target on your back.
Right. And I think people don't think about those things at the time, but when you look at the big picture, you look at how there's not that financial education, especially when you go back in time and look at yourself there. Here it is, you get this credit card. You think about what happens with most 18-year-olds, like, yeah, heck yeah, I could go and do all this stuff. And then you mean I got to pay it back?
Yeah. Well, I basically, I remember my rationale on the day that I got those credit cards was, okay, let me get this straight. I can go out and spend $2,000 today, and all I've got to do is come up with about $20 here in the next 30 days or so. I can do that, right. And that was my rationale, and right. The rules were a little different back then. Back in the old days, I'll be 45 later this month, and when I was in college, they could stand out in the quad and hand out T-shirts and give credit cards away. Well, now, as a matter of fact, one of the very first laws that President Obama passed into law was one that restricted things like that.
I remember those days. You see them just a little table there, handing out T-shirts. Hey, fill this application. Okay, I need a T-shirt.
And then once you get those first credit cards, what follows almost immediately is you get jewelry store cards or department store cards and so on and so forth. And before you know it, you've got more cards. You couldn't pay for the first 2 that you had, and now you've got 6, and they're all maxed out and so on and so forth.
Right. So in that case, what happens with people? Because they end up digging themselves in this hole because they just do one thing after another. Before it's like, oh my gosh, now I have to somehow come up with $1,000 a month to pay for all these balances, but they don't have it. What are the options for people at that point?
Well, generally speaking, it's kind of a rule that if you remain in communication with your creditors, they tend to want to give you the benefit of the doubt, because if you ultimately charge off an account, that's a lose situation for everybody, not the least of which is the bank, who's got all this money out there that they've paid for goods or services or whatever and haven't been paid back. Well, that's a loss for them. And although they get a write-off for it and so on, They don't want to do that. So a lot of times you can talk to your creditors and say, hey, look, I'm going through a difficult financial time. I may have overextended myself a little bit. Is there anything that we can do? Sometimes on revolving accounts or credit cards, they may stop the interest for a little while. Other times they may reduce your minimum payment a little bit, for a brief period. There's a number of different avenues, and really it just kind of depends from creditor to creditor what they'll do. They may suspend your charging privileges during that time, but at least you're not getting into that trap of, I'm paying $200 a month and 75% of it is going to interest. That's a really big thing. A lot of auto loans will have a deferment where you can actually skip a payment or two, and they'll basically move it to the end of your car note so that, for those month or 2 months, maybe even 3 months, you get a little bit of a break and kind of get your feet back underneath you. You still pay the same amount ultimately for the car, but you get a break from, making that monthly payment on the short term. So again, it's really probably the most the best thing you can do is actually reach out to your creditors and ask them what their best alternative is. Now, if you get to a point that you're so far underwater and you simply can't, go that route, it might make sense to look into a bankruptcy, Chapter 7 or Chapter 13 bankruptcy. Now, it is kind of a last resort. The problem with the Chapter 7 or Chapter 13 is that although you do get a break and you're not going to risk losing your home or losing your automobile that gets you to work every day, you might very well find yourself in a situation where it's difficult to get credit for some period of time after. For example, if you've gone through a bankruptcy, a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, it may be 2, sometimes even 3 years before most lenders will give you a home loan. Now, in a Chapter 13 bankruptcy, that's the one where you actually make the payments and pay money back to the creditors, over a period of about 5 years. You can, as long as you are current in that Chapter 13 bankruptcy with your payments and you have permission from the bankruptcy trustee, you can actually get an FHA loan very often. So there's a lot of options out there. The key is seek out the advice and counsel of an expert, somebody that actually knows what they're talking about, and explore your options. Don't just assume that, well, I guess I have to file bankruptcy, or I have to let my car get repoed, or I have to let my student loans charge off, or my credit cards charge off, whatever.
And that stuff is valuable because I think it's information that the masses simply don't know, because it's not taught about what to do if you're in a bad situation. And then you also have to look at a lot of the misinformation that's out there as well.
I talk very frequently about the fact that you go online and you just do a search for credit repair. Roughly 35 million results come up. Okay, and these could be books or kits or credit repair companies or different consumer forums and so on and so forth, and all of these may have complete garbage information. I see it all the time. People say, well, I read in XYZ credit forum that if you pay a collection account, they have to take it off your credit. No, that's not at all how it works. In fact, they're expressly forbidden from taking it off your credit just because you paid it a collection account. Now, do some companies do that? Yes. Are they supposed to? Absolutely not. It goes exactly against their agreements with the credit bureaus. There's a manual that is issued to furnishers of consumer credit information, the banks, the credit unions, and so on, collection agencies. When they want to report information, it gives them the guidelines. This is exactly how that information is supposed to be reported. These are the minimum this is the minimum information that needs to be reported for this to be compliant with federal law. Well, I have that book. Most consumer credit experts, and I'm holding up my quote fingers as I say that, most consumer credit experts don't actually have that expertise. They certainly don't have a copy of that book. I've had that book, several editions of that book dating back to when I first got into the, consumer credit business full time.
And that in itself is it's extremely important because you're looking at what you can actually do versus people saying what they think you can do, but so much is not
Well,
factual.
and it's difficult for those of us in the industry that have made a living of this. And I say this all the time with all due and necessary respect to my friends in the real estate industry and the mortgage industry, auto sales and finance. Very often the information that these people are giving out is flat out wrong. And that's extremely problematic because the average consumer goes to a mortgage lender thinking that this mortgage lender is the end all be all and is only going to give them the right information. And, nary a week goes by that I don't have to have, dare I say, arguments, but certainly heated fellowship with people who want to argue with me
Right.
about what things actually count in the credit score versus don't. And if certain things matter in your credit score, how much, and so on. And I'll give you a good example. Child support or alimony, any sort of family support, it shows on your credit report, but it is not calculated in your credit score. Now, I can't tell you how many times I've had to argue with people and actually show documentation from my FICO, the people that actually write the scoring formulas that say child support or family support obligations are not included in the credit score. While they may, payment histories and so on may appear on their report, it's not going to impact the score. Now, it can impact an underwriter and their decision. And an underwriter, for those that don't know, is the person who actually takes all the information, including credit score, but also payment history and things like that, and determines, if somebody's eligible for a loan. Well, they may look at the fact that you have an arrearage in your child support and say, yeah, this is not going to work. We're not going to do it. Even though your credit score is a 680, but you owe $150,000 in back child support or back alimony, well, that's, maybe something that can kill a deal for somebody.
Right, and that's the information people need to know about because it's why go through that whole process if you're going to go and buy a house and realize that, oh, you're behind on these payments and only to have your hopes and dreams destroyed because someone told you, oh yeah, you could do this, and you'll find out you
Yeah,
can't.
exactly.
So then with all the misinformation out there, how is it that people can ultimately find someone like yourself that's a trusted source instead of the fly by night just kind of doing the air quote things credit repair person out
Right.
there?
Well, there's a lot of ways that you can really vet a consumer credit expert. Number one, length of time in the business. My industry is such that the longer someone is in the business, the more reliable, generally speaking, their information is going to be because there is so much scrutiny from federal organizations like the CFPB and the Federal Trade Commission, but also just consumers that we're in an age where people will go on Yelp or go on the Better Business Bureau and review somebody, or Facebook even review somebody and just totally throw them to the wolves because they didn't do a good job. If someone has been around, and I use myself as an example, I've been doing this for such a long time that there's very little question about my credibility. Now, some people may not like a pricing, or they may not like a decision about whether or not I think they're a good candidate for something that, credit repair would help. But you can trust that the answer I give you is a good answer. Somebody that's been around for a year, they've got a really snazzy looking website, but there's no information about the ownership of that company. Their names or faces aren't on there, and all they have is an 800 number with no physical address whatsoever. Well, okay, that's kind of a red flag. The other thing that I would always tell people to do is check with their individual state. They're in just about every state, not every, believe it or not, but in just about every state, there is one entity that is charged with the duty of regulating credit repair and restoration. For example, in Texas, it's the Secretary of State's office. In order to do business in Texas as a credit services organization, which is what we're categorized as, you have to have a registration on file with the Secretary of State's office that basically says that you are a legit entity. You've done the necessary paperwork with the state to either a DBA or articles of incorporation or whatever. Here's the person that's responsible for the company and how to get a hold of them, right? That stuff is all there at the Secretary of State's website. You can actually, they actually have a database where you can search for credit repair companies. So if, for example, you find somebody that's got a really cool ad on Facebook, or they got a cardboard sign at an intersection somewhere, and you want to figure out if they're a legit company, well, you can go to the Secretary of State and ask. You can just type in the name or the phone number. There's a bunch of different information you can put in. Actually, it may not be phone number. I think it's zip code and stuff like that. But when you put that information in, it'll let you look and see if they're active and if their paperwork is current. So, and it varies from state to state what the requirements are and so on. But, obviously here in Texas, it's where I've done business, the better part of my life. It's, it's pretty cut and dry.
That's important for people to know that there's a database out there, because until you mentioned it, I don't think most people would have had an idea that you can check to see, is this a legit business, instead of, well, they have an 800 number, so they must be legit. Like, yeah, you can go buy one of those.
Yeah. It's, and there's a lot of things, any one piece of information. I know companies that are operating today, the ownership of which I know, I don't have a tremendous amount of respect for, but I know them, that are still operating without the necessary registration information on file with the Secretary of State's office. Now, I can call and report them, but, do I want to be that guy? I may or may not, depending on how egregious the violation is. There's other companies that are violating the federal law, which, Byron, you and I have been friends long enough that you've seen me go on rants on social media about people charging upfront fees for credit repair. Any manner of upfront fees for credit repair is very specifically forbidden under federal law. There's a federal law called the Credit Repair Organizations Act, and under the prohibited practices section of that particular statute, it says that no credit repair company or person may take money or other valuable consideration in exchange for a service before that service has been fully completed. In other words, setup fees, enrollment fees, all of those things, whatever clever nomenclature they give it, if they charge money up front from a consumer, they are breaking federal law. And the penalty for that, civil and criminal, big time stuff. You can actually get, if you're a consumer that has paid upfront fees for credit repair, you are entitled automatically to 100% of your money back. Now, the other credit repair companies don't like me saying that out loud, but it's true.
And that's important for people to know of the facts, that it's to take an industry where like people might think like it's kind of shady in different areas. Like, well, no, there's people in it that are shady, just like in any industry. You're going to have some people that are very ethical, and others, well, they kind of bring that average down.
Yeah, absolutely. And and the thing is, you hit the nail right on the head. Just like with any industry, there are people who, take away the bad apples, if you will, or the bad actors, if you will, in any given industry, kind of give a black eye. The problem with my industry, the consumer credit industry, is the fact that people generally only hear the negative news. They don't hear the success stories except in ads from credit repair companies. And I don't like to go out and do a bunch of testimonials, but I mean, it wouldn't take me long to get 20 people to call you and tell you what a great job we've done for them and how it changed their life. And, now their kid is growing up in a house instead of an apartment, or now they're driving a car with air conditioning in the summer instead of, some old beater that doesn't have it. Excuse me. All of those, those stories don't get told. The ones you hear about are the ones that play on the 9 o'clock news or 10 o'clock news, where somebody, conned a bunch of people out of money. So that is kind of the perception that a lot of people have of my industry. And another key thing about this, I wrote an article about 2 years ago where I talked about the fact that my longevity in this business is due to two things, essentially. The first is being good at what I do, having the experience, the tools, the tips, techniques to effectively create the changes that we promise for people, number one. And number two, equally important is the fact that I can identify someone who is not a good candidate for what we do. And I'll give you an example of that. If someone was sent over to us by one of our lending partners or real estate partners, auto sales and finance partners, and we look at the credit report and they have a late on their car note last month. And then the month before that, they had a late on their student loan. And a month before that, they were late on a credit card. And a month before that, they were late on a house note. Well, that person doesn't have a credit problem. They have a budget problem. And all the credit repair, all the credit restoration in the world is not going to help a budget problem. You have to get your bills in line, get everything current, stay current, and then look at some of the options for getting rid of some of the erroneous information that creditors and collection agencies often put on people's report as a tool for improving your credit score. And by identifying those people and telling people, no, I'm sorry, this is not the right system for you right now. Give it 6 months, get your ducks in a row, get everything in order, and then let's revisit it and see if you're not in better shape. That's, in as much as anything we say to people is probably the most important. I'd much rather tell somebody no in one 10-minute conversation than make promises to them that I can't keep and then have to dodge their phone calls for 4 or 5 months. And that's what a lot of these companies do. They charge a bunch of money up front. They pay commission to a salesperson who made them a bunch of empty promises, either because they were uneducated about what was possible or because they were simply lying to get a commission, and then it doesn't work for them. And that's doubly bad for the industry because that same person will now go out and tell the rest of the world, yeah, credit repair is a scam, it doesn't work. No, you were not a good candidate for credit repair and restoration, and as such, it didn't work for you. And I'm sorry that whoever told you you were did so, but if you'd have come to a real expert, I would have gladly told you that you weren't a good candidate.
And that is important for people to know, because if people, they don't know what they don't know, they just kind of buy into like, oh, we can fix anything.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, if it's a budget problem, well, they need to fix it.
Yeah,
first.
absolutely. I mean, and it never fails. We have people that we go and, we literally just knock the bottom out of it, do a great job for them, and everything is coming up roses. And then the very next month, they're late on their car payment. Well, guess what happens to their scores? Exactly.
Right back down.
And then what they do is they go out and tell the world that, hey, credit repair is a scam. It doesn't work. I paid all this money and blah, blah, blah. My scores didn't go up. Well, no. If you'd have done what we told you to do, your credit scores would have gone up. Problem is,
Right.
you didn't do your part. You know what I mean?
Right.
So.
Right. Exactly. And people don't realize it. It's that whole acceptance of responsibility. People always think, oh, it's this person's fault, or they said this and blah, blah. It's like, you're the only one who can make decisions for yourself. So you gotta own up to
Absolutely.
it.
Absolutely.
So in terms of like the erroneous information, because like obviously people end up, if they have bad things happen to them, things are sold off to creditors and so on. How does that process work? Because someone might be thinking, but I had a credit card with Chase or whatever company, and now they have XYZ collection company calling them up. What happens in that?
Well, essentially what happens is, let's say you have a credit card. The credit card, MasterCard, Visa, American Express, whatever, you stop paying on it. Well, they have to collect on that for 6 months. And at the expiration of the 6-month period, they can then sell the debt to the highest bidder and let them try to collect it and keep, get whatever they collect out of it, or they can assign it to a company who tries to collect and keeps a percentage of whatever is collected. Okay, so there's a difference there between a collection agency and a debt buyer. Collection agency is the company that's basically working on commission, and they get a percentage of whatever they collect for the company, the original company. The debt buyer basically says, okay, they owe you $1,000. Tell you what, I'll give you $100 for that $1,000 debt, and that's the end of it. And then whatever they can collect above $100 is pure profit for them as the debt buyer. So what you'll see a lot of times is a credit card will charge off. You'll see that on your credit card, on your credit report. Then suddenly you'll start to see this collection agency popping up on your credit report. Well, that collection agency may try to collect for 3 months or 6 months or a year. If they're unsuccessful, they may very well then sell it to another company. And that can continue more than once, believe it or not. So you can very often end up with the original account being charged off, but then 2 or 3 other collection agencies all trace back to that same original source account. Now, is it legal? Absolutely. Is it something that I think needs to be changed? Absolutely. I don't think you should be hit by 3 or 4 different collection agencies for the same charged off account. I can see where maybe it's okay if you have the original creditor and then the first collection agency. But if that first collection agency sells it, I think that they should then be removed from the credit report, because you never signed an agreement with that company, you never did anything with them, and so on. But that's just me, soapboxing it. But it does happen all the time.
Right.
What happens, and this is kind of the interesting part, a lot of times when that transfer of information takes place between the original creditor and a debt buyer, there simply isn't enough information very often to justify what is being reported by that debt buyer. They don't have the contracts and they don't have all the necessary information to essentially validate what's there. And that's kind of what opens the door for us on the credit repair and restoration side to do what we do. The original creditor, generally speaking, they've got all the paperwork. It's archived somewhere and so on.
Right.
But when that transfer takes place, they may buy 10,000 accounts at 10 cents on the dollar for $1 million. Well, what do you think the likelihood that 100% of the documentation necessary to justify what's being reported changes hands as well? I can tell you that it's a very low percentage. So
Right. That makes sense. If they're buying it, and then of course if the pattern continues, if it's bought and sold several times, it looks. My opinion would be the inaccuracies should technically then increase, because it's that many more steps removed from the original source.
Yeah, exactly.
So I can see how that would really open up the opportunity. So in that case, then, what happens if you notice that there's inaccuracies based on what is being reported in the actual facts?
Well, there's, depending on who you ask, there's a number of things that you can do. The first thing you can do is go directly to the individual creditor or collection agency and ask that they validate the information as it is being reported. Okay? If you go to the credit bureaus, which you should also do, if you're going to go to the creditor or collection agency, you should also go to the bureau at or around the same time. The difference in what the two do, though, is a point that needs to be made. Individual creditors and collection agencies have to validate what is being reported. The credit bureaus verify what is being reported. Now, the distinction between those two is pretty simple. The process for a consumer to dispute information on their credit report with the credit bureaus is they go to the bureau, say, hey, I think this information is wrong and here's why. What say you? Well, then the bureau then has to go to the furnisher of that information, in this case, a creditor or collection agency, and say, hey, consumer says this information is inaccurate. Is it? Yes or no? Well, the furnisher then has the obligation to investigate it, see if it's accurate, if changes need to be made, or if it's so wrong that they need to just delete it. Those are the 3 options: corrected, updated, deleted, or completely left unchanged. No, it's 100% accurate, timely, complete, and verifiable, right? Because those are kind of the standards. If you go to the individual creditor or collection agency, well, that's where it gets a little bit more involved. Now, people all the time, and we talked about the credit forums and all these goobers online that are self-proclaimed experts talking about, oh, you need to ask for signed contracts, and you need to. They don't have to give you a signed contract. There is nothing in the law that says they have to give you a signed contract. There is for collection accounts, there's a dozen or so things that do have to be reported accurately and completely. Beyond that, there's really not a whole lot that they have to do. The trick is knowing what those 12 or 13 things are. And it depends on the account type and so on, how many there are. But generally speaking, it's between about 9 or 10 and 13, 14, 15 different individual pieces of information that have to be reported for a particular type of account to be compliant with federal law. Now, with collection agencies, it's right at a dozen or so. And those pieces of information are very specific. The difference between a consumer asking for validation on an account and an expert asking for validation is knowing exactly what to ask for. You can ask for contracts all day long, sign receipts and sign this, and it doesn't matter. They don't need any of that to justify what's being reported. What you need to ask for is much more specific than that, and it has to do with specifically what's on the credit report.
Right. And I think that's something more consumers need to know, that while it's possible that they can do it themselves, but just for that information there to know what specific things to be looking for, that takes that expertise that you're just not going to pick up necessarily just by reading forums. Think, well, these guys say I can do it, so I'm just going to go ahead and attempt it myself.
Yeah, and I mean, you will have some measure of success using just kind of a random, a shotgun method where you just kind of throw it at the wall and see if something sticks. Yeah, you're probably going to have some measure of success. But to have the kind of success, the level of success that an actual professional organization is actually going to have, you're going to, you need to be a little bit more specific. And that's where experience does make the difference. And, I've got a litany of examples of things that you can do on your own. And, as I said, us being friends on Facebook, you've seen me go off on rants about this. You can cut your own hair, but It doesn't necessarily make sense. You can mow your...
Hey, I cut my own hair.
Yours is pretty easy. But, some of the ladies, for example, how many women out there cut their own hair? Or, maybe color their own hair. Yeah, you can do it. But it's going to come out better if you let a professional do it a lot of times. You can replace the transmission in your car, but it's better to let a mechanic do it. Somebody that has the tools and the experience to do it and do it effectively. So.
Right. Oh, yeah, exactly. There was a time that working on your own car, oh, yeah, you could easily do it because it was pretty simple. Now with the complexity, I refuse to touch the engine.
No chance.
I just take it straight to the mechanic, like, yeah, can you fix this? Thanks. I'll be back in, like, when is it going to be done? 5 o'clock? I'll see you then.
Exactly.
Because of how complex it is. So in terms of the erroneous information and then of seeing if it's, if it's verified or so forth, what happens if it's incorrect and it's deleted? What happens to that debt?
Well, the debt still exists. That people ask all the time. Say, well, if, I get this deleted, do I still owe it? And I say, my standard answer is that's between you and whoever you choose to pray to. If you can reconcile not paying it, well, then so be it. The debt doesn't go away. It simply makes you look better on paper. Now, true story, I was actually, I do a lot of speaking engagements, and I was actually several years ago, doing a speaking engagement for a bunch of mortgage guys, and this one salty old guy in the crowd, I could see him sitting there kind of grimacing and shaking his head at everything I was saying the whole time. And toward the end of the program, when I actually asked for questions and so on, this guy said, yeah, but don't you feel a little bit like a, sleazy attorney that gets people off on a technicality from a murder rap? And I said, you know what, that's a very fair question, and it's a fair assessment, I suppose. But in reality, if you are wrongly accused of murder, do you care if I get you off on a technicality, or are you just tickled that you don't have to go to prison? And that's very much how it works from a consumer credit standpoint. The law is very clear about how the information has to be reported. And if the information is not reported according to those laws, those guidelines, which are written by the industry itself, the reporting industry itself, well then, it shouldn't be there. And I liken it to, people call them loopholes, but, things that you can write off on your taxes. You take write-offs on your taxes, right? Because that's what the law says. I mean, you could argue that the moral thing to do would be, nah, you should go ahead and pay. Well, okay, maybe. I don't know a whole lot of people doing it. Everybody takes every write-off they can
Right.
because it's financially smart to do so. Credit is no different in that respect.
Right. So in that aspect, if you can write off, things deleted in that fashion, what should, let's say, someone do if they have debts out there that they're verified, so that way, it was 5, 10 years ago, or however long, they can get it reconciled without making those, no, those that part of their credit report current again. What's the best way to solve
Well,
it?
first and foremost, most consumer credit information can only be reported for a period of 7 years. Now, there are some other things that can last 10 years. For example, Chapter 7 bankruptcy and so on can last 10 years from filing. A judgment can be 10 years from filing and 7 years from paid. But for the most part, collection accounts and things like that, 7 years. So if it's older than that, it shouldn't be there to begin with. Now, one of the key things that people don't understand is what actually determines the age of the account. What starts that 7-year clock? And what that is the date of first delinquency with the original creditor that led to the current status of the account. So for example, if you stop paying on an account in the year 2000, we'll just make it simple. January of 2000, you made your last payment, or you were supposed to make a payment and did not. That means that January of 2007 is the last time that anybody should be able to report that. Okay, and there's minor differences
Right.
from account to account type, but for the most part, that's the basic guideline. What happens a lot of times, though, is these collection agencies will illegally misrepresent those dates, which allows the information to appear on your credit report longer than it should. Now, that's totally illegal. It's actionable in civil court, but you got to have the guidance to do it. And that's where, again, going back to the same old song, it's helpful to have a consumer credit expert in your corner.
Right. So by the sounds of it, then depending on someone's situation, they could go through that financial hardship, and then as they, of course, they get their budget and things in line. Worst case scenario, that they go through your program, you improve their score, that anything that's still remaining is, can drop off after 7 years from that initial delinquency. Then, correct?
Say that one more time. I'm sorry.
That after the 7 years, like they've gone through your program, you've helped them, they've improved their score, but then those few things that are remaining, they'll drop off after
That
7
is
years.
correct. Yes. Now, generally speaking, the law says they will. So long as these companies don't illegally manipulate those dates, as I mentioned before, then yes, you can expect those things to come off. The problem is a lot of times, particularly when accounts get bought and sold multiple times, that's when you start to see those dates start to magically get newer, and thus that information stays in your report longer than it should. And people say, well, it's just an error, and they call it a bona fide error. But what I always point out is that I don't think I've ever seen, in all the years I've been doing it, an error in favor of the consumer. Those errors almost always
Right.
seem to favor the collection agency, who's trying to keep it on their report longer, and thus, you know, have a greater chance of getting some money out of it.
Right, exactly. So when the debt's bought and sold several times, like from your experience, what have you seen like as like the rock bottom, where it's like, in terms of, I don't say bottom feeders, but for bottom feeders where they're just buying whatever debt, and it's called, like, let's say, junk debt at that point, just to collect anything. Like, what are you seeing them buying it for on the
Oh,
dollar?
pennies or fractions of pennies. It can be that small. Yeah.
Wow.
And there's
Wow.
and I don't want to call that any one company, if only because I don't want to um, give them any unnecessary press. But there's companies out there that are multinational and that are so huge that they collect in the billions of dollars. Many of them are publicly traded companies that they're that big
Wow.
that they actually have stock, listed that you can buy. I mean, it's crazy when you think about it. Going back to the guy that asked me if I felt like the, smarmy defense attorney getting somebody off on a technicality, the amount of money that these collection agencies illegally collect every single day dwarfs what I have done for the consumers in my entire career. They collect that much money illegally every day. So do I feel bad
Wow.
about costing these guys millions of dollars every year? No, not in the least. Because they're costing people a
No,
lot more
definitely
money.
not.
And and not just the money that people pay to these collection agencies, but if you think in terms of the fact that a person purchases a home, and if not, but for the presence of this one collection item, their interest rate would have been 0.5% better. Well, over the life of a $250,000 mortgage, that individual person could be paying an additional $100,000. So even though this $100 medical
Right.
collection really isn't that big of a deal, they paid it and it only cost them $100. Yeah, but it cost them $100,000 over the 30-year life of their mortgage. So the amount of money that consumers are being
Right.
asked to spend is significantly greater than what it might appear just based on the credit report itself.
Right, exactly. And that is so valuable in terms of what you're doing for the consumer out there, because otherwise, who else is going to stand up for them to let them know what their options are? Because as you know, if it's on the internet, it must be true,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah. Unfortunately, that is kind of the prevailing thought. But yeah, the joke is I have the hashtag man of the people, all the time. And the only thing I can say is I wish there were more of me. There are some good people in the industry, many people that I've known for years and years and years who are, by all accounts, competitors, but they do the right thing for consumers. And I'll always celebrate those people and wish them the best. And if someone doesn't want to, work with a company that I'm associated with, hey, that's fine. Then, go to one of these companies. The key is I don't want to see anybody go to one of these companies who operates outside the confines of state or federal statute, or anybody who simply doesn't know what the heck they're doing, because that can be a bigger problem for the consumer than, just leaving it alone.
Right. Oh, definitely. That's so true. So then, what are some of the resources you have available that they can start learning about making smarter decisions so they can avoid being in the situation for needing credit repair, but if they're already in it, they can make the right choice and choose someone like yourself as an expert versus the fly by night person out there.
Well, I like to consider myself very much a resource for all things consumer credit related. I always encourage people to visit my website, and I'll seize this opportunity to go ahead and plug it. It's just my name, doccompton.com. And I have links there to several different things in which I'm involved and so on. The first and most obvious, pertaining to this conversation is Omega Credit Repair. Although I started Omega Credit Repair back in 2004, in October of last year, my best friend for over 20 years and who has worked with me for the last 10 at Omega, David Dishman, has taken the company over, and I've basically taken the role of a technical advisor. I'm basically the mad scientist who sits back in his little cave back in the corner of the office and thinks of clever ways to trip up the disingenuous and ill-acting collection agencies and the bureaus to benefit consumers. I don't have anything to do really with the day-to-day operations of Omega anymore, so David is kind of the go-to, the point man, if you will. So that's one part of it. The next thing is people oftentimes need to establish credit. Maybe they're recovering from a bankruptcy or recovering from a divorce, or maybe it's just they're young and haven't established any credit. They've listened to some of the quote unquote gurus online, or their granddad who told them that credit is a bad thing, and they've just simply never gone and gotten a credit card. Well, we have creditgecko.com, which is a website that offers a number of consumer products, credit cards, loans of any number of different types, and then credit report scores and monitoring services as well, right there. Then we've got Credit Tools with a Z, which is a do-it-yourself credit repair website where you can actually go and download template letters to do your own credit repair. And people say, why on earth would you offer that when you are a party to a company that actually does credit repair? You know what? Not everybody can afford it. Times are tight. Budgets are budgets. And there was a time, 20 some odd years ago where I couldn't have afforded credit repair. Obviously, we talked about that at the beginning of the interview, but I want people to have access to it. Now, is it exactly what we would send out on the professional side? No, but it's the same quality of letter. It really genuinely is. And you can get, letters for anywhere from $5 to $10 that are going to work really, really well and way better than any of the other nonsense that you're going to find supposedly for free on these internet forums and buying kits on eBay and stuff like that. And then the last thing, and this is something that's really probably going to be of most interest to a number of the people that might listen to this, is my new book, Credit Ready in 5 Simple Steps. And Credit Ready was a project that I released in late December of 2016. It was designed to be kind of a guide for people who anticipate making a major purchase, whether it's a home or a car, or whatever. And it takes them through 5 very simple steps to get the absolute most out of their credit. Now, it's not credit repair. Excuse me, let me be clear about that. It's not a credit repair book. I'll give you the bullet points, the 5 simple steps. If people want to buy the book, they can get it at the website. I'll give that information in a minute. But the first step is get your reports. Know the difference between different types of reports. What you get at Credit Karma is not going to be the same thing that your lender pulls, and why that matters to you. The second step is reading and understanding what's on your credit report, what counts versus what doesn't, what counts the most versus the least, and so on. And then the third is, what do you do if you find errors? What if you're a victim of fraud? How do you handle that? The fourth step is establishing credit. Like we talked about a minute ago, if they just don't have it and they need to get some, here's how you do it, how you get it on your report, and why that matters. And then the fifth step is basically managing the credit that you have, particularly in the months leading up to a major purchase. How do you manage what you have in such a fashion as to get the absolute maximum out of it? The last chapter alone is worth the price of the book, and the book is only $10, $9.99. You can get it at creditreadybook.com. If you forget that, don't worry about it. There's a link at .compton.com, and if you forget that, you're probably lost because I've got the easiest name in the world to remember. But the
how do you spell doc again?
You'd be surprised. People get it wrong all the time. D-O-C-K. It's not. No, it's D-O-C-C-O-M-P-T-O-N. Just like the city. That's what I always say. Or the encyclopedia if they're old enough, because some people are actually, like myself, old enough to remember Compton's encyclopedia. But yeah, the book...
that's way back.
The book is a great tool for anybody that wants to just kind of buff their credit a little bit, particularly if they're wanting to make a major purchase. It's also designed as a co-branded book. So I've partnered with a number of realtors, mortgage lenders, and auto sales and finance people all over the country, where we actually put their name and contact information right there on the cover, and they can use it as a marketing tool. But the average consumer can just purchase it at creditreadybook.com.
Oh, that's great. It's a great way to get your name out there in front of more people, because you're able to amplify your message and help people just get ready for it instead of decide like, oh yeah, we're going to go and buy a house, and then they go buy a boat.
Yeah. Well, and
that's one way to.
It happens all the time. People say, should I buy a car first or a house first? And my answer is always the same. Which one do you want to live in?
That's a good way of putting it.
The reality of it is, if you get a house, people are dying to give you credit. Okay, they'll give you credit cards. They'll give you Car loans, really super easy, because it's when you buy a home, you've pretty much locked yourself to a location. The last thing that people tend to want to give up is their home. And if you've gotten a mortgage for 100 or 200 or 300 or 500 or $1,000,000, you're less likely to let that go. So they know they're going to be able to find the car if they need to come repo it. But they also know that you're responsible enough to afford 100, 200, 300, and so on home, and that you take care of your bills well enough to do so.
Right. That is so true. Well, I want to thank you for sharing a wealth of wisdom today on the Big Movement Podcast about people making smarter choices with their credit and how to really clean it up. And also, most importantly, of how to identify experts in the credit repair industry so they can avoid the shenanigans that often unfortunately take place there.
Hey man, I'm glad to be here. I love to spread the message. The more people we can share it with, the less consumers get hurt by, those that wish to do them harm financially.
Oh, you're welcome. And well, I hope everybody takes the opportunity to pick up your book and learn how to make smarter decisions with their credit.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to the Big Movement Podcast today. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Now that you've surely been inspired to take your entrepreneurial career and business to the next level, you can stop by the website and get more. And if you're ready to boost your business brand, be sure to grab your free report, 7 Easy Steps to Build Your Brand Today.